I would like you to indulge me in reminding you of a few things and sharing these helpful tips and hints. My name, of course, is Lori Rhodes. I am your moderator today and organizer of the event on behalf of Terasem Movement. Now, to begin our tips and hints, only the presenter will be advancing the slides on the presentation screens. So if you happen to be in view of the screens, please resist touching the arrows and advancing the slides. If they fall out of place, I will be happy to assist the speaker. Unless you are a presenter, please do not engage your speaker or voice chat control during the colloquium. A Q&A session will follow each presentation. Q&As are limited to the text box found on the lower left toolbar of this Second Life screen. The presenter will address only the questions appearing within the chat history box. A moderator may assist to ensure, time permitting, all questions are addressed by the presenter. If you are a presenter, please make certain your cell phones or other signal-emitting devices are either turned off or sufficiently away from your computer during the time your microphone is engaged. Failure to do so may interfere with your audio. And I wish to alert everyone or tell everyone that these proceedings are being recorded and may be posted online sometime after the event. Thank you, and I wish a wonderful Terasem colloquium experience to all. And if you have not already done so, when you enter the environment, I had this slide up. This URL will take you to where today's program is on Terasem's website, and you are free to make a copy. It should open up a PDF. There appears to be a space in between where it says FL10 and the word program. There's actually an underscore there. So if you're typing it in by hand, make sure to put that underscore in so that you find the program. Okay, now, Terasem hosts the colloquium on the Law of Futuristic Persons, having been inspired by the long-running colloquia on the Law of Outer Space, which started back in 1958, primarily by a gentleman by the name of Dr. Stephen Grove, who taught space law at the University of Mississippi. Dr. Grove was a Hungarian immigrant to the United States, leaving Hungary shortly after World War II. At first, these colloquia began with no more people than those gathered here to speak within this virtual conference room. People scoffed at the notion of discussing a law of outer space. Nobody had even been to outer space, and certainly there were no societies, cities, or human habitats in outer space. So why would we need any laws regarding outer space? Well, Dr. Grove and his colleagues believed that if we didn't prepare the law ahead of time, we'd end up with a lot of potentially destructive conflict. Ultimately, they were responsible for preparing 5 treaties that were adopted by most of the countries in the world, or all of the spacefaring countries. These treaties were thought to be a fundamental to the fact that we can enjoy satellite communications, joint space missions with Russian, Chinese, Japanese, Americans, people from all over the world. And when things from outer space have caused damage to or on the Earth, as several years ago when a spacecraft from Russia crashed into Canada, spewing nuclear active radiation, instead of causing a war or conflict, it was resolved according to the terms of the treaty. There are many analogies, actually, between the law of outer space and civil rights. Back in the late 50s, civil rights were a very radical concept. Human rights, which today we celebrate as International Human Rights Day, which is what today is, was barely even a 10-year-old concept. Now we are at the point where human rights is a fundamental principle of international law that people are working hard to implement and strengthen. But now we've gone far beyond the initial development of outer space to the point that Futuristic persons such as robots, those cryopreserved, body parts made to order or uploading are all things that are very much in the news, shifting from what was once considered science fiction into science fact. So the real question is, do we want just all of the futuristic persons to kind of appear and refight the battles of civil rights that people have been fighting for over 400 years? Or do we want the futuristic persons to come into being knowing that there is a mutually agreed upon framework for which their civil rights and their human rights will be respected? And we've seen untold harm caused by the millennial-old human traditions of slavery, which became especially pernicious in the last 400 years. Futuristic persons are in fact treated as slaves, and if their aspirations to have human rights are just scoffed at, we'll basically be repeating the tortured history of human oppression all over again. And the consequences could actually be much worse because of the multiplier effect of technology. So in 1958, it was interesting that the experts of the first colloquium on the law of outer space decided some things that had been taken for granted for centuries, like natural sovereignty. Sovereignty had to give way, had to just be obliterated because satellites were going to fly over countries, whether the countries liked it or not. I think that we too might now begin to pave the way for concepts like citizenship and death, which might have to give way to new techno-legal realities. Traditionally, citizenship was determined by where your parents were born or your birthplace. That may have to be altered for futuristic persons, and death may not be a reality, but instead people may shift into different forms of cryo, bio, or digital stasis. Some proactive questions we hope this colloquium will pose and or address are rights and obligations, applications of law, personhood, citizenship, parenting, poverty, even liability. The laws need to progress with evolving technology. Technology is moving so quickly, but the law does not move as quickly as technology. It's all too often running to catch up. Turing's theory of machine consciousness is barely 70 years old, but I think that we're coming closer and closer to those days of recognizing that consciousness depends on personhood and values, not on particular substrate like flesh or skin. We don't know how long, of course, or our course of law of futuristic persons is going to take. We hope to continue meeting for 10, 20, 50 years to continue to develop more and more advanced concepts over that time. It won't take a year or two, but that's definitely not a reason not to work on it. Finally, I would like to conclude with thanks to our sponsor, the Terasem Movement, Inc., whose mission it is to educate the public on the benefit of greatly extending lives and promoting nanotechnology and cyber consciousness through conferences like this one. We encourage you to visit cyberrev.org and begin a mind file as one of Terasem's practical demonstrations of technological immortality. And our other projects, our other projects like the Terasem online journals of personal cyber consciousness and geoethical nanotechnology. Terasem also has a radio station that you can tune into 24/7 at terasemradio.com, which offers additional content and podcasts from Linda and Fred Chamberlain. Fred and Linda were the founders of the Alcor Life Extension Foundation. And Terasem Motion Info Culture, which is a sub of Terasem Movement, produced the film adaptation of Ray Kurzweil's New York Times bestselling book, Singularity is Near, and which was only recently released through a variety of digital markets. The actual title slide to the colloquium, which I'll back up to here quickly. let's see. Bear with me a second, folks. Okay, here's the title slide. That's a screenshot or a still shot of the actress Polly Perrette, best known for her portrayal of Abby Shuto in NCIS. So, okay, I thank you from Terasem Movement. And let me advance the slides to where I was before. And let's see, hang on a second. Okay, with that concluding a brief introduction into what our conference is all about, I would like to invite our first speaker to the podium, writer for Mashable, The Guardian, and Slate, and author of Artificial Intelligence, John Havens. And I'm queuing him up via text. Bear with us a moment, everyone. John's having a little technical glitch.
How about now? Hello. Hello. Looks like great. I think now you can hear me. Hey, how y'all doing? Thank you for your patience with my getting reused to Second Life. I was here a number of times 4 or 5 years ago. As you can tell, I have my new avatar, so I'm a newbie. I'm moving my cell phone away from me, and I guess I'll just start now if that's okay. Cool. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. Really honored to be here. Thank you to Lori and to everyone else for the invitation. Really appreciate it. And I'll just get started because I know we've got about 15 minutes. So, Lori, I will, if it's okay, ask you to advance the slide if you could to the next slide. So just very quickly about me, I'm a contributing writer, so I'm not on staff, but a contributing writer for Mashable, Guardian, Huffington Post, and I've written for places like Slate and TechCrunch. And I'm an author of a book that comes out in February from Penguin Random House called Artificial Intelligence, because I love the puns. Artificial Intelligence, Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Our Machines. And my work over the past 2 years has been on artificial intelligence ethics, which does not mean in any way trying to enforce a specific type of ethics on someone, but examining how can a person control the data surrounding their identity so they can project who it is they want to be in the virtual or digital arena. So one of the reasons I'm excited to be here today is that's what Second Life has been doing for years. When you come in here, you project whatever aspects of your identity you choose. So that's a lot of my work now, or that's the focus of my work on AI ethics. So could you go to the next slide? So I call the era that we're in right now the age of the algorithm. And if you could move to the next slide. I'll just type the next slide if that's easier. Some people call this the algorithm economy. So when you say artificial intelligence, you can either be speaking about machine intelligence or deep learning or what's called AGI. There's a lot of different terms for the specific types of technology involved with artificial intelligence. But when I speak about the algorithm economy, I mean as a human in the, quote, real world or the meat space versus any technology that has an algorithm. That economy that we're in now, there's all this amazing technology that's available to us, but there's what I call a data asymmetry regarding how those algorithms work. And it's not about, companies are evil and people are good and all that. Those terms can be useful. But what I wanted to talk about here is just how the algorithm economy has really kind of sped ahead of aspects of the human economy. So for instance, these are a couple of really interesting companion robots. Pepper is the taller one and Jibo is the smaller one. There are so many devices, not just androids or robots, that are outfitted with effective computing, effective with an A, that use sensors that can measure and influence human emotion. This is another big aspect of the algorithm economy, is not just that we're being tracked online and offline, but that we can be overtly influenced by effective computing devices. And again, everything I talk about with technology, I don't see technology as inherently good or evil, but it's also something that doesn't just sort of sit there. It's not inert. It affects us. Next slide, please. So I mentioned effective computing. A lot of people don't realize, I think, how advanced effective computing has become. Facial recognition technology, eye tracking technology, analyzing biological data via ubiquitous sensors and wearables. It's a very exciting field. If you don't know about effective computing, a fantastic woman named Rosalind Picard is really kind of one of the first real creators of the tech. And then there's so many other people working in the space. Again, the technology can do glorious things. It's just that used in hands of people that are mainly focused, say, on advertising, not that that's evil either, but there can be a sense of tracking people or influencing and engaging their emotion without the people fully understanding that process. Next slide. This is a cartoon. And this is, I bring this up again, not to, I'm a marketer, I do some consulting, I used to be at a PR firm, I have a lot of friends in the advertising world. I think my joke here is to mainly say, like, is the main goal of all this amazing technology, and I include Second Life in that, and the avataristic sense of creating identity, is it the best way to create it based on advertising and personalization? And my answer is no. It's not that that's wrong. It's not that advertising can't kind of lead the way with certain things. But I just think in the algorithm economy, there's a lot more benefits to be had if we can be more aware of our emotions and our identity within that scope. Next slide. This is just a picture, kind of the matrix idea. Are we going to be sort of controlled or control? And I kind of covered this, so we can go to the next slide. This is my book, which I mentioned. And again, I bring this up just to say this is the focus of my book is on this sort of AI ethics, but with a real sense. The first part of the book, a lot of it's about personal data and control of data. Next slide. The ethics side of things, you've probably heard a lot of, or read a lot about this. Really right now with autonomous cars, AI ethics is starting to come to the forefront of a lot of discussions in the sense of when there is a vehicle, in this case an autonomous car, that can, quote, make decisions whether to turn left or turn right, for instance. Say if a small child runs in front of a car. Take all this with a grain of salt. It's not that the car is choosing life or death. It's that the hardware is imbued with algorithms that have been created by individuals, programmers, engineers, who are doing their best to make, in this case, the vehicle as safe as it can be. So a lot of my work with ethics is really about law, meaning I'm not a lawyer, but working with lawyers in the sense of we're at a really exciting time in humanity where we're now creating laws for, as you know, and Lori I think already touched on, we're creating laws for devices. We're creating laws for how our identity and how we're represented in places like Second Life is going to adapt and change. So the ethics, like with this car decision, is really to back up. My goal is to back up in the design and engineering process and say, how can people creating technology be more aware of the ethics or morals of the end users who are going to use their products? And to me, this only will inspire innovation. It inspires smart growth built on trust versus an engineer who's not trying to do anything wrong or evil, again, like I said, but they build something and they haven't thought through all the ramifications of what their technology will do. Next slide. So this time it's a real opportunity. And for me, values, when I say values, I've been really passionate. A lot of my work, I also study positive psychology. And is to, I think we have an advantage as a human species, even, an opportunity, a glorious opportunity, where we as individuals, and when I say that, I don't just mean in meat space, I mean in Second Life or wherever, we can ask, what are the values that are important to me? And we now have, I think, I know we have the technological basis to then imbue the values that you want to live to and have them be represented in its own sort of algorithm. So a lot of what I'm sort of fighting for or evangelizing about is to have people start to understand how precious their data is, because it really represents who you want to be. And one part of the conversation with robots and machines and AI I've kind of moved beyond is any conversation like with machine automation where people start comparing. Well, this robot will do a better job than this person. This device will do a better job than this person. Or this person, humans will always own creativity. I don't find those statements to be as helpful for me because, for one thing, I think automation machines have already demonstrated, like with Deep Blue and chess, etc., there's so many things that machines can already do where if you want to call it better, you can, but I think that devalues individuals on both sides. And I think what's critical is to really think about this fact. What if we get to the point where machines could, quote, do everything, quote, better than humans? That means we have to identify where we have value now, where we want to have value, and also say, you know what, there may be a machine that could do something better than me, and that's awesome. But I kind of want to keep doing this over here with my human abilities. And then I think, too, for me, this is my personal view, I've grown a lot more at ease with the idea of a lot of my relationships with machines, because there's not this sort of either or very polarizing part of the debate. Next slide. And Lori, is it okay if I go a few minutes over? If you can type that in, let me know. I want to be conscious of other speakers. But this is the question I like to ask people and myself, which is, how will machines know what we value if we don't know ourselves? And that's intended to be upon a double entendre in the sense of, in my book, I have a lot of fictional vignettes. And I have one vignette, for instance, that opens with me when I'm at age 80 and my son, who is a mind clone embodied in a robot. And I got the term mind clone from Martine Rothblatt, who I know couldn't make it today, but I loved her book. And a lot of what I explored in that chapter, that fictional vignette, was the sense of the character of me hadn't really taken the time to explore what he as a human felt was important to his life. And so the machine part of my, it was supposed to, like a, a replicant, a copy of my son, also didn't know. And he talks to me about that. And I think that's critical, is to say we have the opportunity, again, once in a species opportunity, to ask without needing any machines or without needing quantified self tools. To ask what's important in my life and track it and have that be part of then what represents your identity. By the way, I'm not saying don't use machines in quantified self. I'm just saying we have the opportunity without needing to always have the influence of personalization algorithms where we can't always recognize who it is that's tracking us. We can still, we're at a point where we can still turn off devices, even though we may still be tracked, and ask those deeper questions about ourselves. Next slide. Now I'm just going to skip to this, the actual sort of theory I have about what I call values by design. Next slide. So there's two parts to what I call values by design. The first I'll call a process, or it is process. Next slide. What I've learned, there's not a simple way to say, here's the 10 rules for artificial intelligence and ethics. I researched for the better part of a year when writing this new book to find existing laws or rules or guidelines. Most people talk about Isaac Asimov's Laws of Robotics, which, as you probably know, is this glorious, it's based on a glorious science fiction story called Runaround. And I've interviewed for Mashable a lot of like CEOs of AI companies, and they would mention that they created their ethics based on those short stories, or that short story, which I thought is awesome. I'm a huge fan of his work, but I didn't really understand how that would be the basis for building technology. So when I say process, I've interviewed a number of AI, ethicists who do what's called applied ethics. Applied ethics is really a methodology that you use at the front end of a design process. It's basically like marketing. And I equate it to, this picture here is of what's called in the marketing world, the agile method for marketing. The agile method is just, there's a process called a scrum. It's really when you get in a room with people, not dictating the outcome, but having a framework for the process. So first of all, that's what I think I'm trying to help build for engineers and programmers, is tools that, working with them, that can really have them ask questions about ethical issues they may not have thought of before. So that's part one of the process. And next. Next slide, I'm sorry. The good news is there are a lot of companies. Lucid is an AI company that actually has, I wrote about them for Mashable. I think it's the first AI company that I learned about that has a formal ethics board. Google, when they bought a company called DeepMind, had said they were going to create an ethics board, and they may have one internally. But for me, it doesn't really help in one sense if a company has ethics internally and they don't let the external stakeholders, meaning their customers, know how that works. The ethics board with Lucid, they have a much more transparent process, and that's very exciting to me. And I think they're really setting the bar for other companies along those lines. Next slide. The Future of Life Institute, if you don't know about it, wonderful organization that in January of this year, 2015, put out about an 8-page PDF that lists a number of different things specifically to work on with artificial intelligence. It's a great pragmatic list that you can look at in terms of, instead of just kind of like moving beyond the fear of AI and ethics issues, and saying how can we really think about things like, do we want to let machines or devices have the ability to have a kill decision with military AI? And there's a great group, if you want to get to know them, called, I'm blanking on the name, it'll come to me. It's the Fear of Bots, Stop the Killer Robots, I think it is. It's tongue-in-cheek. The logic is, a lot about AI ethics has to do with accountability. It's not about demonizing the technology. It's about saying, especially with the military, if there is a autonomous weapon that would be used on a foreign country, we need to be able to have the accountability of knowing which country launched it, which area of the country launched it, etc. So FOI is a great place to check out. Next slide. I'm just conscious of time here, but if you get a chance, check out this group called ORI, O-R-I, the Open Robo-Ethics Initiative. The woman that runs it, she's fantastic, A-Jung Moon, and she's essentially crowdsourcing multiple questions that really get people to think about ethics on a very personal level with AI. So for instance, she has this question: should an alcoholic be allowed to buy a companion robot that would then be programmed to serve them alcohol? And I love the question because it sounds incredibly tactical, right? Meaning very granular, but it echoes so many issues of legal issues. It echoes issues of who owns the robot, accountability, and she's brilliant. She's what she's doing is asking tough questions and then asking guests to her site to reflect on those questions. So ORI, definitely check that out. Next slide. I'll zip through this too because it's very geeky, but when I talk about profiles, for the past 2 or 3 years, I've been really evangelizing that individuals create what are called personal data banks or personal clouds. Technologically, it's pretty simple. It just means, someone asked about links. I didn't put links in the deck. I'm happy to work with Lori and put those links in if that's helpful. So I'm happy to, I'll follow up with Lori afterwards, so thank you. But the logic here is, in the old school days, when I would type a Word document and you wanted a copy, I'd put it on a floppy disk and hand it to you. All of the data was then on that disk and safe, as it were. Well, if we can take the core data about our identity and sort of surround it in a bank that would let us have peer-to-peer exchange of that data, it doesn't mean that we're not going to talk to brands or organizations. It's not really about privacy. I don't use the word privacy as much because that's really about preference. But if we're able to control who gets our data and when, then we really get to control, as it were, our subjective identity. And one thing I wanted to point out with AI and robots, etc., a lot of times when I have these debates with people, they'll say, well, robots are going to do things a lot better than people because they won't make the same mistakes as people. And I don't necessarily disagree with them because it depends on what we're talking about. Will autonomous cars drive better than humans? Yeah, of course. I mean, in general, there's going to be a lot less, drunken drivers, or there won't be any. But I think what's really, for me, an important question to ask myself, and I'll ask you too, is how we protect our right to be subjective, meaning how we protect our right to be human, which means in one sense we're protecting our right to be flawed. And I'm not saying that we want to have permission to be cruel to others or break laws, but I just mean it's not the right question to me to say, well, robots and AI will do things better than humans when it comes to things like emotions and personality and your identity. Because how do you know what's, quote, right? And that's why the field of ethics is so critical, because again, it's never telling someone how they should feel. It's navigating a process to figure out how to serve, if possible, everyone's best interests. Next slide. Yeah, you can skip that. Next slide. Very quickly, and Lori, do I have another 5 minutes? I just want to be conscious because I know I'm the first speaker. Because I can wrap up pretty quick. I mentioned I work a lot in the field of, I won't have any Q&A. All right, I'll zip through this and I'll give you all my email address so that if you have questions, I apologize that I won't be able to address them here if I go over, but I'll give you my email. I've done quite a bit of work in the positive psychology space, and what you're looking at is a survey I created with a friend of mine who's a PhD and an expert in positive psychology. There's a famous sociologist whose last name is Schwartz, and he created a list of values that are common around the world. both to men and women in multiple countries, and you're looking at them here. And what we did is created a survey where at the beginning of 2 weeks, you look at these 12 metrics of values, and on a scale of 1 to 10, you say how important they are to your life right now. So if you like being outside, for the word nature, you'd say 10. Then at the end of every day, we would send an email where you would just say, did you live to your values today? And same thing, if you were outside the whole day, you'd say 10. If you weren't outside at all, it'd be a 0. Then at the end of 2 weeks, we just simply added all the data together, and we sent back to someone a portrait of how they were actually living their lives in terms of living their values. And there's quite a lot of early evidence, a lot of research and early evidence showing that if you don't live to your values every day, your happiness and your well-being decreases. Next slide. So in my case, I had said health was important to me, and then I realized I never went outside. I never worked out. So I've lost 30 pounds in the past year just because I want to be someone who lives to their values. And it really, it wasn't until I tracked what was important to me that I started to see, I gained insights into, well, I thought this was important to me, but I'm not spending any time pursuing it, so maybe that value isn't as important to me. Next slide. And I bring this up because it's an example, a simple one. I mean, we intended the survey to be dead simple, but it's one way that I tracked my values in terms of, I could say, like, faith is important to me, and I realized in that 2 weeks, I said faith was important to me, but then I didn't do anything. I wasn't reading scripture or talking to anyone or, watching a video on Buddhism, anything. So now I've tried to have that more in my life, and I've had a lot more increased well-being. But that measure of your values, this is a picture from Wired magazine of a guy and how he created his own algorithm based on eHarmony, the popular dating site. eHarmony, I think, has at least 400 questions that you answer before you go on your first date. That really is a values ID, right? You list your faith, you list your sexual preferences, etc. And a lot of what I'm saying about this whole talk is what a great opportunity we have to use that same mindset, measure our values, and then project the specific values that we live, that we feel are important to us, in algorithmic format. So then the algorithms that we project now can have an equity or symmetry with the algorithms that are targeting us. Next slide. And I'm coming here to the end. This is kind of what I talked about at the beginning, having the opportunity, and this is what I call values by design. Once we're able to share our data peer-to-peer and it's safe to share, and we also can have a values code level idea of who we are, then when two different people go to the same self-driving car, the hardware can stay the same, but when we get close enough to the vehicle through Bluetooth or whatever that it recognizes who we are, the interior of the car can change. So from a branding standpoint, it can have different music or look different. And it also may know that I'm a dad, so I want the car to drive slower than someone else. And again, I'm trying to show you all the innovation that I think will happen, whereas a lot of times people think with ethics, it's going to be about guidelines that would hinder innovation. Next slide. And this is just the last question I want to leave with you, and I'll type my email here. Forgive me, I can't tell if Lori, I think Lori will see it, but she can project it. I'm happy to answer any questions either now or later, and you'll see me sign off just because unfortunately I can't hear anyone today. That's the only reason I'm signing off, is I can't hear. But thank you so much for letting me speak, and this is the question I want to ask you, and it's a challenge, but it's a challenge intended to honor your self-worth, however you project yourself in the real or virtual world, which is, how machines don't we value if we don't value ourselves? My belief is that we're all worth the chance to look. So thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it.
Okay, everyone, just to reiterate, for those of you who came in after the initial presentation, all of the questions are limited to the text chat box. And John, maybe we can take 3 questions.
Great, and I actually just was able to hear you all of a sudden, randomly.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, John, look to the chat box. Questions are limited to the chat box.
Okay. So far, I don't see any questions. Am I missing them?
Yes, I think you should click chat on the lower left side because I believe you're in a personal chat with me, and that's why you're not seeing questions. You need to see the chat box for the colloquium.
Great. Oh, here we go. Will establishing ethics for AI be harder or easier than establishing a framework of human rights? From Extropia de Silva. Great question. It's a hard challenge either way. And in terms of which is harder, in one sense, I guess, it makes it harder when you're both trying to say what are your human rights before in ethics before you talk about the technology, and then you also talk about the technology. That said, there's already a lot of really interesting work, like I said, being done with autonomous cars, and I think it makes it easier for everybody involved when there's a specific example in place. So, you know, cars and their safety, and is the driver, the quote driver/rider at fault? There's a lot of precedents already being set that will then, I think, ethically, a lot of, again, what I'm fighting for is really transparency. So, for instance, if you want to get into an autonomous car, then there's some way of it signaling to you, and it would probably only happen once, and then it would enter in some kind of profile, and you would have to enter it again. This is how this car drives. This is how it's deemed safe in your state or whatever. And then also this is the decisions that might reflect ethics, and that could be things like speed, how it tracks your data. So I'll just answer a couple more questions. And again, please feel free to email me after. I know these are dense issues. Dizzy Banjo, first of all, that's an incredible name. Second of all, you say, I may have missed this in the talk, but what do you think about making people relate to AIs emotionally and the potential danger of this versus the benefits? That's a fantastic question. You know, companion robots are going to be proliferating all around the world right away, like next year. You know, Japan with Pepper, and there's Jibo in the States. At the moment, I guess I hate to sound more concerned than excited, but a lot of the work I do is in positive psychology. And when I speak to my psychologist or psychiatrist friends, they're pretty horrified, frankly, in terms of the lack of standard ethical testing in terms of a lot of these devices. And that's where I want to help the engineers and AI community. It's not that they're unused to formal ethics practices and standards, but you know, there may be hundreds of thousands of devices in people's homes soon that can track biometric data and then register, oh, your little child is smiling, so I will smile. And now that robot like Pepper, all the robots can be connected by their cloud. So that means that Pepper in Alaska sees a child smile, up to the cloud, that information, the reaction goes, and now a child in Austin, Texas can be affected by the Pepper kind of network. It doesn't have to sound or be, you know, negative like a Terminator or Skynet. But unless there's utter clarity to the people buying those robots, this is how it works, and there's a personal data framework for them to say, this is how I want my data, my kids' data to be projected, and long-term testing, or at least short-term testing about how, companion robots can hinder and help individuals. That's how I think about people relating to them emotionally. All that said, by the way, I'm not here to judge for any individual to say if they want a companion robot or if they feel they have an emotional relationship to their robots or devices. You know, anthropomorphization, that's something that's very natural. And again, I'm not interested in judging how a person might want to live with a robot or a device now, or as, you know, I think They will become conscious at some point. But that said, right now, today, even in that type of relationship, the owner of the device, meaning the robot manufacturer, to me is that third party that really could be conducive to a great relationship. If it's sort of like dating, think of like a really good wingman or woman. Or it can be a hidden person who's trying to deal with a person's data in ways that they haven't given permission. And then that means the relationship between the individual and the robot or the AI is something that starts off on the wrong foot, in my opinion. So I hope that's helpful.
Okay, John, I believe we're out of time, unfortunately. However, I will put John's email address down in the chat box again, in case anyone has any questions for John after the workshop. John, thank you so much for that wonderfully educational presentation. You gave us a lot of food for thought.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hey, John, if you find your way to a seat, we'll welcome our next presenter. Okay, our second presenter today is not only a writer and a transhumanist, he's also author of The Transhumanist Wager and a 2016 United States presidential candidate. Welcome, Sultan Isfan, to the podium.
Hi, I hope everyone hears me. So, thank you so much for coming today to have my speech. I real quickly try to make sure I can go my slides, and they go, okay, great. There we go. So this is my first time in Second Life, and I'm really excited about it because I'm exploring it for the first time. So I feel like very much some type of virgin with this environment, and it's totally brilliant. And the things like flying and all that other stuff have just been amazing. So, as many of you know, I'm a United States presidential candidate, and I am trying to essentially use my political platform as an agenda to push forth transhumanism. And transhumanism is, of course, using science and technology to radically modify the human being and to improve the human being's experience, which is, in fact, exactly what I think we are doing here in Second Life. You know, I'm on my bus tour right now, so it's very funny. I'm in a hotel room. There's a few journalists around me and a camera crew, and we had just spent about the day with John McAfee. So it's been quite a whirlwind, and we were talking about the future of Second Life, and also the future of cybersecurity regarding Second Life. And I got to say, that was pretty amazing stuff. I'll get into it in a little bit later. What John said. I'm trying to move my slide, but it's unfortunately not working. Lori, would you mind maybe doing my slides? Oh, you got one going there. Good. So I'll try to get that going. The second one's not functioning. There we go. And essentially, there's an incredible amount of different types of issues surrounding Second Life that I have been thinking a lot about on my road trip this last week. And of course, some of them involve virtual sex. Some of them involve virtual morality. Some of them involve the landscape of philosophy that changes when we take on virtual bodies. And I had recently written a incredibly I guess a little bit of a controversial piece for me and a controversial piece for my wife. It was on the idea of having sex in virtual reality. Honestly, what happened is I was speaking at a conference in Toronto, and I put on the Oculus Rift, and there's a program that is designed to allow people to have somewhat intimate experiences with a partner. And of course, that partner was not my wife, and it was incredibly challenging. Just even holding someone's hand, I hadn't held another woman's hand in, however, since I've been married, and it was incredibly powerful. I actually took off the Oculus Rift because I felt like I had crossed that line, but it brought up an incredible issue inside me. I ended up writing an article for Vice on the subject, and I feel like many of us are going to be going through these different types of ethical dilemmas as we kind of traverse the virtual landscape. And I'm a very big believer that virtual reality is somewhere that we're going to end up spending huge amounts of time. If you already look at how many young kids, like the millennial generation, they end up essentially spending time gaming, you're going to see that we're all probably going to end up doing a lot of that in virtual reality in sort of the same format. And I'm hoping that will be the case, because I think virtual reality gives us all the different types of aspects of our life that we may have wanted, but were limited by with the physical world. But unfortunately, the one thing, at least at the moment, that we can't get through virtual reality is one of my number one goals, and probably one of the number one goals of the transhumanist movement, is somehow to try to conquer death, or at least, I don't know if I want to even say the word death. It's more just the idea of a continuity of consciousness of who we are and what our memories are. I'm hopeful that there will be things like mind uploading and using artificial intelligence to perhaps change the way we do research with the biochemistry of our body, and facilitate a much quicker way to find means of life extension. But I'm hopeful that virtual reality will somehow play a part in that. Certainly for me, I'm a big fan of the mind uploading concept, and hopefully it will do that one day. But for the time being, of course, we're sort of just for the time being, we're having we're having a lot of issues with trying to figure out how far we can actually take the mind uploading concept, which is one of the reasons why I actually write a ton about chip implants. I actually have a chip implant in my hand, a little one, and I'm hoping very soon in the future that cranial implants will become a much larger part of the overall, I guess I might even say, structure of society. I'm hoping that EEG technology and headsets and the kinds of things that make our thought patterns, our thinking, our philosophical perceptions able to be translated very quickly to something digital, into some type of machine environment. In fact, and the end goal of that would be creating something in a virtual world like here, of course, much more realistic, where we could then enjoy that. And of course, this all leads to, again, my kind of overriding aim of life extension. It also leads to the idea that we can have a new world where we're able to live in so many brand new ways. I'm sure there's different types of senses we can have. I'm sure there's a gazillion types of different experiences we can have, but a lot of it will come from the merging of humans and machines, hopefully through some types of technologies that we have in our body. Because as it is, right now, we're still somewhat outside of it. Of course, as everyone knows, the key to the key to virtual reality, to basically augmenting our intelligence, and the key to understanding a lot of these different things is going to be artificial intelligence. Now, some experts say most experts would say we're 15 to 25 years away. Some would say we're sooner, and some will say much further. But of course, one of the great goals is if we can get a super intelligence built in on the planet somewhere, that might be able to facilitate our journey into the virtual world, into Second Life environments that are much more realistic, that are perfectly, we can immerse ourselves in these without even necessarily realizing that we're doing them. We can kind of step in from one and step in from out. Recently, when I was at the Microsoft campus, I realized how far some of the halo and some of the holographic imagery had actually come. It's really probably only a couple years away from the point that we will reach out our hands now in the physical world and start pointing with them and creating things in our environment. And of course, cars are already being able to do some of these amazing bits of technology. But once we have an artificial intelligence on planet Earth that can help us see these things, something that might grow in its capacity of intelligence, I don't know, 1,000 times more than our own intelligences, it might very quickly facilitate where we're going in the second world, in this kind of virtual reality world, and it might make it so the transition from the physical world to a better virtual reality, or something that we would want to stay in permanently, could happen not overnight, but very quickly, maybe in a matter of a few months, maybe in a matter of just a year. But of course, a lot of it is going to end up being contingent upon this idea of being able to merge with that AI, either through cranial implants and through mind uploading and through the different types of methods that we can do. Whatever it is, it's going to be absolutely a merging of human beings and machines in a way that we have never seen so much before. We think we're quite connected. We're here in Second Life, and there's technology around us. We all have cell phones, and some of us have chips in ourselves. But in the future, there's going to be, probably the next 10 to 15, 20 years, there's going to be moments when we and some people might become more machine. Maybe 50% of their body matter would be machine. And that's going to be something that I find very appealing, because it will take us to really the true transhumanist stage of evolution. And I was just speaking today about it, that it's going to be very interesting. Will humanity survive? Is this humanity inside this the Terasem Island right now, this event? Or is it already something that we can call transhumanity, or some other name that takes us to another place? Because clearly there are a different set of rules and different set of ethics that are happening in this environment. And it allows us to do a gazillion different things that I really would like to do. And I'm hopeful that we will have a huge amount of possibilities with that when the time comes. So change this. Ultimately, the concept of avatars is one that becomes fascinating to me, because as long as we have our physical bodies back on Earth, or let's say just outside of our computers, we're really converting fully. There might be a moment, and there will be people who will probably do this in 50 years in the future, maybe even 30 years in the future, who will eventually give up their human body. Maybe it will be cryogenically frozen, so they don't give it up entirely, and they will create avatars of themselves, just like here. The difference is that if you cannot go back, how does that change your perspective of who you are and where you're going and all the different things you think? I have 2 kids at home and a wife, and one of the kids is an infant, and I thought, well, if I had to interact with them as a virtual person, let's say through holographic imagery that might be commonplace here in 20 years in the real world, is that the same thing as being in the flesh? Can I offer the same type of love, the same type of care? Well, maybe through different types of methods, we will be able to also create feelings, create actual physical touch, give hugs to an infant, even as our virtual selves. Certainly, it's not just holographic technology that's going to be appearing. It's actually this idea that holographic technology will also be something you can touch. I don't know if it'll ever have any weight, but it might be something that actually carries some form of matter that is physical. And again, this is just, that merging of avatars, virtual reality, in the physical world. Eventually, hopefully, we might just walk into one and come out the other, and we won't really be noticing that great difference. It will be something that's very easy, something that's very simple, and something that we can do whenever we want to. We might all be ghosts in that sense. In the end, I think for me, and this may not be how many other people feel, but I am a person striving to achieve and reach the singularity. It's not that I want a technology to so completely dominate my life, but it's something that I believe is so interesting. It's just interesting. Who doesn't want to know what the singularity really is? Who doesn't, if they had a choice, wouldn't press the big red button and say, I want to go there right now and discover everything there is that far into the future? So whether it's omnipotence, whether it's just omniscience, whether it's a perfect hive mind with all you fine people here, whether it's a complete immersion into one just single entity where one doesn't even recognize themselves anymore. But whatever the singularity is, clearly, Second Life, virtual reality, our avatars, artificial intelligence, mind uploading, and all these different and very exciting aspects of transhumanist life and transhumanist philosophy are going to be merging some point in the future as we make that journey into becoming more and more sophisticated entities. And I, for one, completely welcome that. And I'm really actually happy to have given this speech because generally I talk about politics. So it's really interesting as a thinker and as a philosopher to actually be able to just explore other ideas that have no real bearing in, well, they have bearing in the real world, but they don't have bearing to a huge population yet. And what makes it so interesting to me is all this brand new exploration. Of course, the singularity is moving upon these ideas, but in such a radical way. So when people ask me, do you want to go through the singularity? I almost always say, I would love to. I don't know if that's a way, if all of us would just simply disappear in some technology, grand, dream off in the distance. But hopefully, whatever it is, it would be something that the whole world could enjoy and participate in something that would lead us to much more interesting horizons. And again, I just can't emphasize enough. For me, the singularity represents the most interesting aspect of transhumanism, a place where we finally see where we are going. And that comes to the end of my speech. I'm hoping I'll be able to work out taking questions. But for those of you who don't know, I am driving a coffin bus around the country right now as part of my presidential campaign. And it's parked right outside our hotel room here. And we're in North Carolina at the moment. We've had a great time. I was just at Terasem, who treated me incredibly well, and I had lunch there. And before that, I was at the Church of Perpetual Life. And so the last few days, we've actually been exploring a lot about spirituality and transhumanism together, and especially the future of spirituality. And of course, as we drive around the country, everyone comes aboard our bus and talks to us about these things. So it's been really interesting to also explain to them about things like Second Life and virtual worlds and maybe virtual heavens, indeed. So thanks so much for hearing my speech, and I hope I can work out getting a few questions if anyone wants to ask any.
Just to remind everyone, the questions are limited to the chat box. Zoltan, you will read them from the chat box and answer them. So make sure you click on your chat box and bring it up.
Okay, so I see a question from Extropia de Silva. It says, if you could copy your mind, maybe edit it as necessary. Sorry, there's a couple questions, so I have to go back to the first one. If you could copy your mind, maybe edit it as necessary, and create the protagonist from that story, would you do that? So I think Extropia de Silva has been kind enough to write a pretty, I'd say a 30 to 40,000 word expose essay on my novel, and on my novel, The Transhumanist Wager, which many of you may know me from. I'm distancing my book in that I'm distancing myself from my book in my presidential campaign, naturally, because it's somewhat of an authoritarian book. But the question is, if you could copy your mind, maybe edit it, would I create the protagonist from the story, and would I do that? Well, in my case, I think a lot of people don't realize this, but I'm not that huge of a fan of Jethro Knights. I do think he's a great character, and I do copy many of his aspects. And for those you don't know, he sort of takes over the world and forces transhumanism upon the world, so everyone gets sort of upset about that. But running now as a presidential candidate, there's no way to incorporate a huge amount of his philosophies into my campaign. I've taken on, as many people have noticed, a much more leftist approach, much more even socialist approach with some of the bigger ideas, and so I certainly wouldn't edit into my character too much of Jethro Knights. In the virtual world, it certainly would be interesting to see how that might happen. But I don't know, for humanity's sake, Jethro should arrive and do what he does in the novel. I'll go to the next question, which is from Susan Schneider. I'm not sure if it's to me. It says to hi, Keith. But let's just make sure this is good. Well, actually, I'll go to the next one because I wasn't, Susan, if that was a question from you, please, for Zoltan, please address it to me, because I didn't want to interrupt in your conversation if you were having one. So from Eshkatun Magic. Zoltan, I will definitely quote you on virtual heavens. Okay. And we're going to the next one. To me, the most interesting thing and this is from Sarah. To me, the most interesting thing is envisioning where we want to go and implementing getting there from here, not some final destination. I don't know if there's such thing. I sort of agree with that. That's pretty good. And I'm seeing if there's any other questions. Going through it, everyone. Okay, here's from Wyatt Heidenfelder. Can you elaborate on how you see spirituality operating or manifesting itself in virtual reality? That's a fantastic question. So let me be honest with you. We've been discussing this at length now about a virtual heaven, and I am been thinking a lot because we've just been in the South, and I spent 6 weeks exploring somewhat fundamental Christianity. And as everyone knows, I'm an atheist candidate. Well, some of you may know I'm an atheist candidate and somewhat vocal about that, and that has obviously upset some people. That said, I had a wonderful time touring around the South and visiting things like Alabama's largest megachurch and discussing the future of spirituality, as well as converting robots or saving the souls of robots, and other things like how can we use virtual reality to teach people about spirituality, about God. And one of the things that's been coming up recently is even the concept of a Christian heaven being done through virtual reality. It's very possible, according to Scripture, that maybe through quantum archaeology, we may come up with a way to resurrect every single human being that ever lived at any time in history and give them a chance to live again if they want, or give them a chance to just, be dead. And that in itself would fulfill a huge amount of Christian prophecy. Now, quantum archaeology works a number of different ways, but basically you would be able to, through algorithms or through time travel, reverse a process of what has happened through history and recreate or reconstitute, it should actually be reconstitute, whoever these people were near the end of their lives, and ask them this question. Now, if you take that one step further, you realize that this is almost identical to Christian or to Islamic sense of revelations in their sacred texts. And this brings up the bigger question, because 4 billion people on the planet, over half the planet, believes in some type of revelations. If we use quantum archaeology to do that, will we fulfill some of the great sacred texts? And, my feeling is I wouldn't want to associate this kind of ultimate resurrection of every spiritual person or every soul or every human life that has ever lived in history as something that would be fundamentally religious or tied to dogma. But I do understand the parallels. And frankly, if it was a matter of it happening or not happening, as I've written before, I would rather go through a Jesus singularity than no singularity at all. So that's certainly, when you ask me about, virtual reality and spirituality, I see quantum archaeology as one of the key components of the fulfillment of many of the great sacred texts that exist today, and that literally over half our population on planet Earth believe in. And it's going to be incredibly interesting to see how this technology unfolds, and if it goes down a much more spiritual aspect, or if it ends up just being much more secular oriented. So I have another question here, and for some of you who have read my book, it's a great question, is, are you a fan of Zoe Bach? And for those of you who don't know, Zoe Bach is the wife of the protagonist in my novel. The protagonist, Jethro Knights, nobody likes, but everyone really loves Zoe Bach. And I got to say, I love her too, and she was part of the reason why I wrote her in, because she is someone who believes in the deepest amount of spirituality. She's a transhuman spiritualist, and she doesn't even necessarily need to have technology redeem her into the afterlife. She just thinks that no matter how it goes, because of either quantum archaeology or because of things like just simply subatomic particles and quarks and things like that, there is going to be an aspect of spirituality that will always be built into this, even in a conscious way. And I'm a big fan of believing that that is a possibility of living indefinitely, although I don't promote that or subscribe to that or say that's it. I know that that's a backdoor for even myself. However, I would like to have, like Jethro Knights, a much more concrete afterlife, a much more concrete continuity of my consciousness, where I can kind of guarantee that the Zoltan that makes it into another being or another transition of his soul, his spirit, his brain, especially my memories, my ego, my just the things that constitute me, would continue down a very stable and kind of physical path. And I know Zoe wouldn't approve of that, but I still think she's amazing for it. And I, as kind of always a back door, I feel like I do have subscribed to an enormous amount of her ideas.
We have time for one more question, Zoltan.
Sure, I'll try to get. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. Okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back one sec to Susan Schneider if I can get there. Sorry, everyone. Okay, so Susan Schneider says, I share your enthusiasm for transhumanism, but how can you look forward to singularity given the issues raised in Nick Bostrom's book, specifically the control problem issues? Thanks. So, first off, Nick Bostrom's book is brilliant, and really enjoyed it, and it's one of those things you could read again and again. I think ultimately, when it comes down to control issues and it comes down to artificial intelligence, we must be very mindful that we could ruin everything. And as everyone may know from a lot of my writings, I don't subscribe to letting an artificial intelligence run wild. In fact, I would never advocate for an artificial intelligence to just be created and let it go. I would only advocate for an artificial intelligence to occur at a moment when maybe 50 human beings, some of the world's best scientists, some of the world's best engineers, some of the world's best adventurers, some of the world's best politicians, and even some of the world's most spiritual people would be directly connected to that AI, and then we can let a superintelligence go, because I would know at least part of the human race is connected with it. I'm not a fan of believing that AI is something that is going to necessarily be our friend. It may not understand the concept of friend. For TechCrunch, I recently wrote a pretty in-depth article about programming hate into AI. And I think the problem is you need to program hate in order to have an AI even understand the very basics of empathy. And that brings in so many different difficulties, because as we all know from watching some of the movies, AI might go rogue. And its rogueness might have nothing to do with us, but it could still be one of the worst things that's ever happened for the planet. So when we talk about AI, I'm entirely for developing it. I would, as a presidential candidate, I would up the amount of budget that goes to it by tenfold. I think AI will be one of the most important things that ever happened to the history, to humanity, and it's our history. But at the same time, I would never, I think, let it go out on its own as a superintelligence that can be independent of us. I just don't see any need for having a species on the planet that might be that much more intelligent than us. That would be something frightening. And that said, I'm also a believer sort of in the Fermi paradox, where there probably are other superintelligences out there, but they have probably already figured out life enough, so they're way beyond our control. But our own creation of an AI is something that I am worried about. That said, I still believe creating something that we can control to help us with science and research should be something that we should do, and we should create an artificial intelligence that that a small portion of the human race could merge with, so that we could see what happens. That may be very beneficial for humanity as a whole. Everyone, thank you so much for hearing my speech. I've had a great time, and I'm going to have fun watching other speeches.
Dalton, thank you so much for that amazing presentation, and also for taking time from your campaign to participate in a colloquium. And it was extremely a huge treat for us to have you visit the Terasem facility in Florida. I also want to let everybody know that this conference center will be open for people to stay in after the event. So you're more than welcome to stay and mix and talk and have questions for everyone. And if anybody needs to get any questions to the speakers today, didn't have a chance to get their question in, email me and I will either put you in touch or give you a venue with which you can get in touch with the speaker. So with that said, We will be moving to our next presenter, who is chair of the London Futurists and a principal at Delta Wisdom, an independent consultancy providing intelligence for profound change. Please welcome David Wood to the platform.
Welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear me fine. So this is my first time in Second Life giving a presentation. And I apologize in advance that my presentation is not optimized for Second Life. It's optimized instead for the First Life. But I will make a copy of this available on SlideShare immediately afterwards. I'm not going to talk so much about particular arguments about super intelligent future people. Instead, I'm going to talk about the kinds of arguments we need to make if we want to establish futuristic rights. And I'm going to try and draw some lessons from some other examples of arguments and discussions about establishing better futurist rights. In particular, I'm going to look at something that's been happening in the last few weeks, which is arguments and discussions about genomic editing, something called CRISPR editing, in which people would, if this was made available, have more rights over what kind of children they might bring into the world, and possibly also rights over their own body in ways that hadn't been accomplished before. And in fact, I was at a conference in First Life in London yesterday, in which many of the leading protagonists of this field were discussing their experiences and discussing what they had achieved. And I think there are some useful learnings to come from this. So there's the conference being opened, and here's a quick picture also of the audience of that conference, in which there was, in fact, several hundred people present, and getting very interesting. So let's move on. I'll start off with some of my own basic thoughts. I am a technologist. I spent 25 years developing technology for mobile software, mobile computers and smartphones. I have great confidence that exponential technologies, nanotech, biotech, infotech, and so on, are the main driver for human enhancement. But I'm not a technological determinist. I believe that the whole process of developing and let's leave this one. I'm a believer that that whole process is strongly influenced by lots of non-technical things, including the expectations that the market brings, including the way that subsidies are applied, including the way that incentives operate, including regulations and the law. And in turn, all of that is heavily influenced by politics. So in fact, the story of my own evolution over the last few years is a little bit similar to Zoltan's, in that both Zoltan and I have come to appreciate that if we really want to change the world and let technology do its very best for humanity, we need to get involved in that political process too. And all the stuff I've got written here in red, they're not necessarily bad. In fact, there are often good reasons why these things apply. And what we futurists and transhumanists need to do is we need to intelligently and wisely engage in that discussion. Let's look at some examples of where technologists have actually failed to engage properly in these discussions and have got themselves into trouble. One of them is in genetically modified organisms. Especially in Europe, the argument was not well made, and in Europe, most governments have got rules in place that prevent the proper use of these organisms in ways that could produce much better food, healthier food, and so forth. So that's one example when people are instead being influenced by pictures such as this, in which the argument is, oh, this is dangerous, and therefore we must stay away from it. Another example in which the argument has not been properly won, and in which non-technical matters tend to dominate the debate, is over the future of another kind of enhancement, which is the enhancement in which we might power some of our future with nuclear energy. And just as with GMO, there are some considerable technical arguments that need and deserve to be had, but lots of what actually is discussed in the general public in this is much more emotive and is a distortion of what's actually happening, and few people will realize that in fact the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident, which got a lot of publicity, has actually had apparently no effect on cancer rates in the surrounding area. And one final example I'll touch on before I move back to the area of genetics is from my own background in the mobile smartphone industry, in which Microsoft failed time and again to get much traction, much engagement from many of the manufacturers, not because of technical reasons, but because these companies were fearful of what that big, powerful company had done in PCs, dominating, extending standards in self-centered ways, and that's why companies were afraid to give Microsoft too much influence over the mobile phone space. And Microsoft is still, to an extent, locked out even after all that time. So these are examples in which social discussion, public opinion strongly influence how well technologies are accepted and adopted. I'm not against that broader influence. Just another example about Microsoft. I'm very glad that governments of the world actually said to Microsoft, we are going to apply some regulation over what you do, so that when you roll out new versions of your operating system, Windows, you will not bundle the web browser, Internet Explorer, so tightly to it that other browsers have no chance. So that was a great example of regulation working positively. Another example in which regulation works positively is in the emerging field of drones. And many of us who are technological fans love the idea of what drones may be able to deliver, but drones are also dangerous. Here's an example from last year in which a father was showing off a drone, it seems, to his child, and didn't pay attention to the fact it strayed very closely into the path of a major airline with a resulting incident risk rating of A, serious risk of collision. There are some needs for regulations there. We could talk briefly about one other example in which a company, 23andMe, has very interesting technology to allow us all to understand our genetic makeup more fully. But that company has run into lots of regulatory hurdles, especially in America, in which the FDA has taken issue with some of the stance that 23andMe are taking and has shut down some of the services that 23andMe wanted to offer. It's not clear exactly what the right apportionment of blame is in this case, but from my own experience working with regulators, I will not accept that they are all narrow-minded conservatives who do not wish to see innovation. On the contrary, there are many people there who would love to see innovation, but they are also fearful about adverse reactions and adverse side effects of modern technology. And so my lesson from this is that companies such as 23andMe need to become better at engaging with the regulators. So I've said all this by way of sort of setting the general field. I want to move on now into the field of genetic editing. And I'll start at the beginning, as it were, back in the 1970s, back when I was a student, back when there was the big discussion about test tube babies. And test tube babies, for a long time, were extremely controversial in the general public. And I remember a lot of religious people saying that this was an abomination. Here's an excerpt from something from 1978, which I doubt you can read, so I'll briefly read it. It's from somebody who believed they were channeling Our Lady, who says it's an abomination in the eyes of God for man in his arrogance to create a living being. What he is creating is a soulless monster. And indeed, there were many versions of that argument in which people thought that, all right, we scientists might manage to create something that looked human, but something fundamental would be missing. It wasn't just the religious people who were opposed to this playing God by the scientists, as it was thought. Politicians at the time were also very fearful of it, partly because they were respecting their religious constituency, partly also they were influenced by another prevailing social opinion of the time, which is the fear of overpopulation. And many of the politicians therefore said, you know, we've got enough people on this planet. We should not be spending lots of money to find yet more ways to bring people in to allow in vitro fertilization from infertile couples. In fact, many of the fellow scientists, other doctors, were very hostile at the works of the two scientists, Steptoe and his colleague, Patrick Steptoe and his colleague, who did this original work. They said it's very painful. Many of the women who were the initial test subjects had tremendous pain through ups and downs of hormones, and public funding for these scientists was denied, and they only went on by support from private individual donors. So it was a tough work. It all changed just a few weeks after that announcement from the Virgin Mary, as it were. It all changed when Super Babe arrived, as it was announced by one of the London evening newspapers of the time. Louise Brown, the world's very first test tube baby, born in the United Kingdom, born apparently extremely normal, a charming, lovely, cute child, and as people looked at her and at all the other test tube babies which were increasingly born, they could not discern any lack of soul, they could not discern any lack of humanity, and although there was still lots of opposition, thankfully that has changed. So we might look at that and say, all right, that's a very positive example, we just need some heroic scientists to pioneer the way, and then eventually the public opinion will change. But I think that would be a bit too easy. And I want to move on to looking at a couple of other examples. So more recently, there's been a lot of discussion about another form of genetic editing. And in this case, it is to fix a particular type of disease which is often passed on in families. It's a so-called mitochondrial disease. You probably can't see this diagram either, but what it's showing, there's an individual there, a woman with an arrow beside her, who lots of her siblings with a cross through them had died at an early age. Children from her first husband, two of them died at a very early age, the third was very ill, all with this inherited mitochondrial disease. The woman then divorced her first husband, took a second husband, and 3 of her 5 children there also died at an early age, and the 2 others were sickly. This story was told in recent debates in Britain by one of the doctors who had been looking after this family for many decades. The story doesn't end there. The woman was so desperate to have a normal child, she had another partner, and sadly that child died early as well. And a few years later she tried again, and yet another partner, unfortunately, had a child that died. I mention all of this because this human story of grief, which arose because of the inability to address this genetically inherited disease, was one of the factors that made many of the politicians in Britain, in a recent vote in the House of Commons and then in the House of Lords, say, you know, we should be open-minded about this. We should be prepared to allow what's now known, a bit misleadingly, as 3-parent children, in which the mitochondria DNA, which is in the main part of the egg, as opposed to the nucleus, that can be changed. It can be provided from another mother. The main part of the DNA, the nucleus, comes from the original natural mother, but the mitochondrial comes from somewhere else. And initially, many people, particularly people I have to say with a Catholic background, were horrified at the idea, but over a long period of time, and you can see it on this chart, when it goes from 2005, in which a group in Newcastle in the north of England started doing this work under license from the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, started doing this work, and over a long period of time, lots of trials were done, lots of regulations, lots of standards were put in place governing when or when not this system might take place. And eventually, there was a debate in February of this year in the Houses of Parliament in Britain, and Britain became the first country in the world after this debate to pass this as something that could be legalized and could be done. So if I now bring out some of the conclusions on this process, which I heard at this conference in London yesterday, I think many of these conclusions apply to other fields in which we transhumanists and other enthusiasts for technology would like to get public support for some of the things we want to do. So recommendations for a positive public discussion. First of all, and don't laugh, there is some value in the slow-moving bureaucracy of bodies such as the United Kingdom Human Fertilization Agency. Because when other people criticize it and say, oh, we're rushing into this, we are on a slippery slope, people are able to say, nothing of the kind. These processes are there to guard against use which has gone outside what's already been approved. The people who supported this, including the politicians from all parties, said there's great value in preparing the ground, airing the issues well in advance, getting the general public used to the idea. There's great value also in trying to clearly separate science questions and value questions. And it's very often the case that when people say, the science isn't clear here, what they actually mean is that how the science is affected by their values is not clear. And it is much more important to be able to say clearly, here's what the science makes possible, and then let's have a separate debate about what our values will do in reaction to that. There was a recommendation to engage bishops. And indeed, the House of Lords in Britain has a whole bunch of bishops sitting in it for very historical reasons. And there was some fear that they would disrupt and vote against the proposal. But having taken the time to explain to them, many of them, what the science was, then it turns out that many of them were swayed by the humanitarian instincts rather than their theological instincts, although not in all cases. I could go on a little bit more, but let's emphasize a couple of the points here, talking about the benefits as well as the risks, so that when people say, there's risks in this technology, we can point to the strong benefits, including the human benefits, including pointing to the appeal to the head, the heart, as well as the head. If I briefly move on to the discussion of the most recent phenomenon, which is the using CRISPR, which is a different genetic mechanism to edit the genes of embryos, or possibly even pre-embryo. There was, of course, a debate in Washington over the last few weeks, and perhaps the most telling contribution to that debate was from Sarah Gray from the American Association of Tissue Banks, when speaking from the floor, choking back tears, speaking to the panel of scientists, she described how her son had suffered before dying of a genetic disorder 6 days after he was born. It's a different kind of genetic order, one that couldn't be fixed by mitochondrial offering. And then, if you have the skills and the knowledge to fix these diseases, Gray said, then freaking do it. Since I prepared these slides, actually there was an article in Britain's Daily Telegraph this very morning quoting Britain's chief science officer, the one who reports to the British Parliament and British government about science issues. And he is quoted as saying, Britain should lead the world with genetic editing technology. So forgive this little bit of nationalistic jingoism from me, but what he basically said at this conference is that Britain is fairly good at the science. He actually said we are good at the science. Also said we are good at the regulation, which can give people some confidence, but also good at the public debate. The public debate takes time. It's important to work it through. It's important to challenge some of people's naivety in things like the precautionary principle. The precautionary principle, as you know, says let's avoid anything that's to do with a risk. The answer to that is that doing nothing has lots of risks. It's got lots of risks of disease in people who otherwise are going to be afflicted. Just briefly, I'll finish off. We need to go beyond, of course, just offering repairs and cures, for which the public reaction is often, yes, I guess that's right. We need to move to a phase when we also get public support for enhancement. And this is where the futuristic element comes in. And this was briefly discussed at the conference in London as well yesterday. And people had two answers to this, both of which I thought were good. The first answer is to say, actually, it's not a diametric opposition. There is actually a continuum. There are various ways in which we can enhance people to make them less likely to have diseases. For example, vaccination is in many ways an enhancement because it makes people in vast quantities less likely to be afflicted by diseases which previously were very prevalent. Then we can go further and say, you know, if people are less likely to err, if they've got steadier hands as a surgeon, if they've got more self-control, they will eat more healthily, if they've got better memory and smarter thinking, they will also choose things that will avoid sickness and illness. So there's another argument that actually some enhancements will make us live healthier. The final stage of this argument is that we can move on to recognizing that natural itself is often flawed and that humanity plus can be attractively better. So I'll conclude with, very briefly, going beyond super babe to super people, the kinds of arguments we must take the time to develop and engage with the public include things like, because we have to overcome their yuck, we have to show that these future people, super people, they are attractive rather than weird, that they're not opposed to the basic principles of humanity, they're not anti-human, I'd rather they are humanity plus, that we're not setting ourselves up as somehow being separate and divisive and antagonistic, rather we are welcoming and inclusive. We're not promising a utopia in which things are already final, rather we're talking about an extropy, a journey. We're not talking about an irreversible change in which after we do an experiment there's no going back as far as possible, and with genetic editing this may be still the case, we can reverse what we're doing. And rather than talking about a brave new world which people fear, we must be able to find ways in which people can see this as a wonderful new world. So there's my basic lessons from what I've seen in my time studying the arguments with the general public about support for futuristic technologies, and I hope that may have set some grounds for thinking about how we can shape some of the arguments we need to bring better support for virtual superintelligences and our own evolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. That's wonderful. We have about 5 minutes maybe for questions, Q&A. So if you would click on the chat box that's on the left side at the very base of this Second Life screen, you should be able to pull up that box. Okay, great.
So I'm looking in there. I see there's been quite a lot of discussion going on. Let's try and pick out some of the questions in there. There's a debate that's going on. Let's see if it can pick a question or two. If a person will soon definitely die, I'm reading a question from Extropia de Silva. If a person will soon definitely die from a disease or something and a medical intervention exists which might cure it, why not let them use it even if it does not pass through all stages of safety, if they would freely choose to take that chance? So it does seem that there are proposals along these lines in different parts of the world. There is the recognition that waiting for full approval for all these uncertain tests will be too long. Of course, there is the risks that people who will take some of these treatments and then suffer much worse than they expected, that there might be some people might be tempted to sue. And so there has to be some recognition that people are accepting that they are going to forfeit their ability to bring legal recourse in such a case. I think there is discussion going on along this. There was actually another lord in Britain called Lord Saatchi who did try to bring such a case through the Houses of Parliament recently. That was actually knocked back because it was felt that he hadn't got his arguments well prepared, and it seems that he was a little bit too friendly to rather dubious forms of health care, possibly even homeopathy and so on. I don't think that's the end of the discussion. I think that those of us who want to support this kind of proactive risk-taking by people who are very ill will lick our wounds from that discussion, and we will find better ways to bring revised bills to parliaments around the world. Let me look at another question in here, possibly, if there's still 1 minute left. Let's see. too many people are not examining things rationally. This is a comment by Voluntary Eyes. Because they filter it through belief systems that distort fact. Yeah, so that's why it takes a long time to have some of these discussions. That's why eventually I think common sense was able to prevail in these relatively small matters so far in the debates in the Houses of Parliament in Britain, because the discussion was carefully reviewed, and in fact during the discussions the Lords and the MPs were texting each other when somebody was standing up and offering a new argument, so that they could be sure they had a good rebuttal as quickly as possible, but one that tried to separate out questions from science from questions of values. And I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to post my slides on my Delta Wisdom SlideShare, and I'm also going to be welcoming any emails that come my way or tweets. I'm at DW2 in a different kind of Second Life. That's the Twitter Second Life, and I'm happy to answer comments there. So thanks for being listening to my remarks.
Thank you, David, for that insightful and informative presentation, and some insight into the differences within what Zoltan was talking about a little bit between, say, the way the American government views things and the way Parliament does. So that was extremely informative. So our next speaker is an associate professor of the Philosophy and Cognitive Science program at the University of Connecticut. Also she's at the Yale Interdisciplinary Institute for Bioethics and is a fellow at the Center of Theological Inquiry in Princeton. So please welcome Dr. Susan Schneider to the podium.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes,
hello?
we hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so I'm completely new to Second Life, and I apologize in advance for any technical glitches that I encounter. So thank you so much, Lori, for having me. And let's see, I'm just trying to walk so that I can see the slides a little bit. Let's see. Well, I'm just going to face this way. Sorry for my rudeness. Lori, I think I'll have you advance the slides if you're okay with that.
No problem.
Okay, thanks. So the talk today is called Minds, Machines, and Persons. And basically, let's see. Go ahead and advance the slide, Lori. Thank you. So in a previous book, I had explored the computational paradigm in cognitive science. So I'm both a philosopher and a cognitive scientist. And I had devised a version of one computational approach to the brain. Laura, you can go ahead and advance it. And now, that was basically a work in the field of cognitive science, but I've then turned to metaphysics, which is a field in contemporary analytic philosophy that studies the fundamental nature of reality. So the book, The Language of Thought, was not in metaphysics, but it occurred to me that even if computationalism about the brain was settled, there's still a host of issues about the fundamental nature of the mind. So that's what I've been working on. And today what I'm going to talk about is my work that is in two forthcoming books that I've been writing on the nature of mind and transhumanism. So the first book is a book of my philosophical papers that is going to be a trade book called The Singularity Papers. Then the other book is a very technical metaphysics book called The Mind-Body Problem. And you'll also see a lot of these themes pursued in the new edition of my science fiction philosophy. And I just got an email this morning that it's available at Amazon for pre-order. So anyway, that's where I pursue these issues. And what I'm going to focus on is the legal rights of AIs in keeping with the themes of the conference. So the capacity to feel pain is obviously important to our judgments about whether something is a person and whether, relatedly, it deserves legal protections or legal rights, or at least consideration in the utilitarian calculus. So today I have two tasks in mind. I want to ask whether AIs can be conscious. I have some concerns. I am a transhumanist, but I'm critical of what I think is thinking that's premature, that makes assumptions that AIs will have the right stuff to be conscious. And then the second thing that I want to ask is what kind of legal protections uploads should have. I want to look into whether you'd really be the same person as your upload or whether you'd merely be a copy. And of course, these two questions are interrelated. Okay, you can advance the slide now. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with the consciousness issue. I want to introduce what I'll call the hard problem of AI consciousness. And this is related, for those of you who are familiar with David Chalmers' hard problem of consciousness, to that problem, but it's different. The problem I have in mind is the following. Would the processing of a silicon-based superintelligent system, or say another artificial general intelligence that isn't super intelligent, would it feel a certain way from the inside? So, you have conscious experience throughout your life, and there's something it feels like to be you from the inside. And what I'm asking is whether an AI would be capable of having that if it was configured in a way that was intended to make it conscious. Now notice that the question could also be asked, ironically, by an AI itself. So consider a superintelligence that was trying to do philosophy. It might sit around the seminar table, well, in virtual reality, and ask whether carbon-based systems like us, being comprised of different materials, have the right substrate to actually be having experience, or whether they're just acting that way. So I think you can ask it if you're an AI, or you can ask it if you're a person about creatures that have a substrate that's different than your own. Okay, you can advance the slide now. So I think there are a lot of considerations that militate for and against certain types of answers to this question. And I don't have time today to go through all of them. For those of you who are interested, you might want to look at, I believe it's section 3 of a recent paper at my website called Alien Minds. I've been working with NASA on related issues. But I'll tell you what concerns me the most. I do not agree with John Searle's Chinese room thought experiment. I don't think that suggests that machines don't have minds or are not conscious. But one thing that has occurred to me as I've been thinking about astrobiology is a really simple concern. It's that carbon molecules form stronger bonds than silicon. And unlike silicon, carbon has the capacity to form double bonds. Now, in the domain of astrobiology, this difference has important implications because it is for this reason that carbon is said to be well suited for the development of life, and silicon is not. So if these differences are important enough to translate into differences concerning life itself, I guess my concern is, could it be the case that these are also differences which translate into differences regarding capacity to be conscious? So I regard it as an open question whether an AI can be conscious. And I don't want to move too quickly and assume that even though I'm very enthused about the possibility of greater intelligence in the universe and the possibility of brain enhancement with silicon chips, that these enhancements will actually be compatible with consciousness. So I want to regard it as an open question. That being said, if I was going to bet, I believe that there are also some reasons to believe that silicon-based creatures, if configured in the right sort of way, could in fact be conscious. So if I had to bet, I would say they could be, but I believe that it is an open question. Okay, so next slide. Okay, so basically, I want to skip to the bottom of the slide here. Or actually, I want to skip to the second column. So if the answer to the AI hard problem is that AI can't be conscious, then uploads in super intelligent machines, even if they're vastly smarter, would lack inner experience, even though they may even act conscious. So I think that this should enter into our judgment of whether or not these creatures are persons, and what kinds of legal protections and legal rights that they deserve to have. If something's not conscious, it's not capable of feeling pain. And I'm not sure it should enter into, they shouldn't deserve the same legal protections that creatures that feel pain have. But that being said, I do want to offer a positive suggestion into how to determine an answer to the question that I've posed. I do think that when we begin to enhance the parts of the brains, the parts of human brains that underlie conscious experience with silicon-based enhancements, that may be a way to tell whether silicon can actually be the right substrate for conscious experience. So consider people who have strokes. There are cases of people who lose consciousness in a certain domain, so they could lose their ability to recognize faces, for example, and you can see behavioral evidence for that. So if we began to successfully replace the areas of the brain responsible for consciousness, and I think that would constitute evidence against the idea that AI can't be conscious. It would suggest that AI could be conscious. Okay, but I do want to stress that it's an open question. You can change the slide now. Thank you. Now I want to turn to something else. I want to turn to the second issue, and that is the issue of uploading. And what I want to ask is whether an upload would genuinely be you. And I assume that this crowd is familiar with what uploading is. I'm here talking about a case of, say, destructive uploading, where your brain is sliced up and your neural properties are measured precisely. Let's assume that the technology is perfected. Should you upload if what you want to do is actually survive? Well, I'm skeptical that it would genuinely be you. For one thing, your self or mind would have to transfer to a new location outside your brain. And physical objects do not normally jump across space-time to new locations. They follow a continuous trajectory through space over time. Okay, you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Further, consider an uploading scenario in which your brain actually survives the scan, as may be the case with more sophisticated uploading procedures. Now, suppose your upload is downloaded into an android body that looks like you, seeming human. You decide to meet your upload in a bar, suppose. As you drink beer with your android double, the two of you debate who is truly the original, who is really you. Your upload could argue convincingly that it's you, for it has all your memories and even remembers the beginning of the surgical procedure in which you were scanned. But is it really plausible that that upload is you? You're sitting right next to it. So why think you really uploaded in the case of destructive uploading then? Okay, you can change the slide now, Lori. Thank you. Further, I want to ask if you could really be in many places at once, sort of like Smith in the Matrix, but hopefully nicer. If you really uploaded, you would be downloaded to multiple locations at a single time, at least in principle. So suppose 100 copies of you could be downloaded. You would be multiply located That is to say, you'd be in multiple places then at the same time. Now, ordinary physical objects don't work that way. My coffee cup is here. It's not simultaneously on a beach in Brazil. A physical object can be located in different places at different times, but not at the same time. And we seem to be physical objects of a special sort. All right, change the slide over. And I'm just winding up. Here's another way then to put the issue. We should distinguish two questions. First off, if someone's brain is scanned and uploaded, would the upload be the same person as the original? Or would it merely be a replica? That is uploading a form of survival? Secondly, if someone's brain is scanned and uploaded, would the upload be conscious, deserving of rights? So I believe the answer to the first question is no, while the second is an open question. Although if I had to guess, I would say probably it is conscious. You'd have to look at the configuration of the computational system to know for sure, but in principle, quite possibly it is. And we should be very careful in making judgments about consciousness, obviously, because it is so important to our judgment about whether something is a moral agent. Now, if I'm right, even if you believe that the brain is computational, you should not upload if your primary motivation is survival. You should seek biologically based brain enhancements instead, and you might even consider cryogenics. So there will be no uploads who were once humans. Uploads are just digital descendants of biological beings, but they deserve legal rights if they are conscious. Okay, next slide. Now, there's a response to all this, which I call the software response. And that says that uploading the mind is like uploading software. You can upload software and download it to a new location. So software can even be downloaded to multiple locations at once, contra what I suggested. So perhaps we're not like ordinary physical objects at all. Perhaps our minds are instead programs. When a person's brain is scanned under ideal conditions, the scanning process copies the person's neural configuration or their program or informational pattern. One can survive uploading insofar as one's pattern survives. So I think Keith is here. He did a piece on this, I believe, in Wired or Big Think. Anyway, a lot of people responded to my view with articles offering this kind of position. And I find this position in my own field, philosophy of mind, as well. So I'd like to respond to it in one or two slides, and then I'll end my talk. So go ahead and move to the next slide, please, Lori. Thank you. So I think that there's a related model of the mind here, which I call the software model of the mind, which says the mind is like software. And I think both the software response and that related view of the mind are incorrect. I have a longish paper on this, which I'll post to my website, hopefully within the next few days. I'm just finishing it up. So if the mind is a software program, or relatedly, a pattern of information, it's an abstract entity. Now, the field of philosophy of mathematics studies the nature of abstract entities like equations, sets, and programs. And they're said to be non-concrete. They're not spatial, temporal, or causal. That is, they're not in space, they're not in time, and they don't cause events to happen in the world. Equations don't cause anything, and they're not located anywhere. The inscription of a number could be spatial, but the equation or number itself is not a spatio-temporal thing. Now, we're not equations, we're not programs. We think, we cause things to happen in the world, we act on things in space-time. So I think minds are spatio-temporal entities, and in fact, that's the standard view we have of ourselves, that we are spatio-temporal. Further, we can tell we're not abstract entities like equations because not only do we cause things to happen, but moments pass. We can tell just introspectively that moments pass for us. We are beings in time. Okay, last slide. Thank you. Now, you might think that there's a good response to this quick argument that I just gave. And that would be what I call the software instantiation position. So what if the proponent of the software model of the mind held that the mind is not a program, but instead is a program instantiation? The advantage of this view is that program instantiations are concrete objects like computers or brains. They're not abstract. Okay, so the long and short of this is maybe this view is right, but this does not allow us to survive uploading. I actually have some philosophical problems with the view myself, which are in the longer paper, but I can't go into them today. But if you're a concrete instantiation, then you're a physical object, so all of the original objections that I raised still apply. You can't be multiply located, so if something happens to your instantiation, you die. So you're not going to be able to upload. Uploads still, though, could be conscious, assuming that the answer to the AI hard problem is that they are conscious, and in that case, they'd be deserving of rights. But it's just that if you tried to upload, you would be creating a different instantiation. It would be a copy of you, it wouldn't be you. Okay, well, thank you very much. And I think that's the end of my talk. So I'll check to see if you have any questions.
Susan, did you bring up your chat box?
Yeah. It's very small. Okay, so you want me to, oh boy, yeah, where do the questions start?
Actually, you can just scroll up a little bit, and if you see anything that is a comment or a question, you could read part or all of it. Okay. I know the one that's there is quite large.
Okay, I see something from Keith. Hi, Keith. I'm trying to find enough room to read it. Let's see. Okay. Just give me a minute because I'm new to this. Okay, Keith says, thanks for nodding in my direction on the software response. I see this as basically a psychological model while you favor a more physical model. Sorry, just give me a minute. I lost it. Tying identity to the body, or at least the brain. Admittedly, the simplest psychological identity theories have some problems, but more so than body identity. Parfit showed this back in the 80s. He offered a hypothetical hemispherectomy in which both hemispheres are transplanted into new bodies, a scenario that confounds body identity theories. Yeah, okay, yeah, I teach Parfit. I quite enjoy his work. What if 1%/99% and I don't, he says VS/VA, I'm not sure what that means. Does that change who gets to be the original? Why don't you favor a branching identity theory in which identity splits into multiple identities that are equally descendants of the original? I think identity can split forward in time into multiple separate people with a common ancestry. None are more original than the others, even if some contain a higher proportion of original biological substrate. This strikes me as the only way to resolve paradoxes like the hemispherectomy scenario. Thoughts? Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. So that's really interesting. I guess my own feeling on the issue is that I guess I see my role as raising the openness of the question about whether we could survive uploading. In a pluralistic society, I think people shouldn't just assume that they could survive uploading. They should deeply reflect upon the possibility, given their own metaphysical views about the nature of the self and mind. And it sounds like, Keith, you know a lot about the personal identity literature and know how controversial each of these answers is. Indeed, Parfit himself thinks that there really is no survival. So depending upon how you fall on these issues, you're either going to opt to upload or opt to not upload if given the choice. So I just happen to think that, on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, to be honest, I think there's no such thing as survival. But I guess I just don't think the idea of patternism is correct. I think that there are a lot of philosophical problems with it. Okay, so let me see if there are any other questions. Lori, are you seeing any other questions in there? Because my box is really small.
You can make your box wider by grabbing the corner of it, where it's like white dots, and moving it.
Okay, all right. So Extropria de Silva says, I do not like the term merely a copy. It implies the upload is somehow an inferior person. If my primary copied her mind and that upload became me, I would not like to be thought of as inferior. You're absolutely right. And I support, if we find out that computers could be conscious in principle, I completely support the very same legal protections for uploads. And I didn't mean to imply inferiority in any way. By the way, these issues are discussed very nicely in a science fiction novel by Robert Sawyer, in which his upload survives, and there are all kinds of legal problems that ensue. Okay, let me see if there are more. Let's see. Ted says, why is the ability to feel pain included? Some people have genetic conditions. Oh, very good point. Right. I think it's good. The utilitarians for a long time have considered it to be a very important marker for including something in the utilitarian calculus as a moral agent. However, you're right. There are people who do not feel pain, and of course, we definitely should include them. And if a computer can't feel pain but is conscious, it should be included, on my view. Consciousness and the capacity to feel pain are not equivalent. So think about, right now you're listening to these ideas, and hopefully you're not feeling too much pain, right? You're having intellectual thoughts. That is the content of your conscious experience. It doesn't just involve the capacity to feel pain. Let's see. Try to see if there are more questions in here. I'm seeing a lot of comments. Okay, here's one. Awareness of self in environment, including awareness of other similar aware beings. Being aware of oneself is self-awareness. I'm not sure what to make of that comment. I'm sorry. Let's see. Let me move on. Well, I apologize if I missed anybody's questions in here. Here, I'm going to go down to the bottom and just see if... what are your problems with patternism? Well, I think I went into that a little bit in this talk. I do have a longer version of the paper called The Mind is Not the Software of the Brain. So I think the problem is that the patternist, like Ray Kurzweil, for example, tends to see the person as an abstract pattern, and we're not anything like equations or programs. So it was the objection that I made in this paper. And then also, I have an older paper called Transcending and Enhancing the Brain, where I suggest that patternism isn't a very good guide to the conditions under which we would survive, because it's very difficult to understand what changes in a pattern are compatible with the survival of a person and what ones are not. So I think the patternist owes us more of an account. But, I find it perplexing that transhumanists or patternists when they advocate such radical shifts in the pattern that would come, with upgrading one's consciousness or cognition, becoming a super intelligent being.
Susan, we have time for one more question.
Okay. Let's see. Keith asks, how could we verify your concerns, such as, oh, it just went away, such as whether, here we go, I got it. Silicon can support consciousness over carbon. It seems impossible to verify. Yeah, Keith, I mean, in the longer version of a paper that I'm writing with Pete Mandic, which I'll post on my website when it's done, we talk about this. So, I mean, I think that you'll never know for certain that a computer can be conscious if what you are doing is looking at human brain enhancements to see if when you slowly replace parts of the brain, the person seems to be conscious. And that's because you can't really jump inside somebody else's head and know the content of their experience. They could just be play acting. But on a realistic basis, I think it would be that, I mean, a gross deception like that would involve scientists sort of cleverly bypassing all of the information processing in the brain that would be telling the person, hey, wait, I can't see faces anymore. My visual recognition, for example, has been shot. So I think if we looked carefully at the nature of the silicon-based enhancements and we didn't see any bypassing, any clever tricks so that the person verbally reported that they were conscious of something when they weren't, then we would have reason to believe that the person really is conscious of, say, faces or conscious of the world or whatever the consciousness involves as the person claims they are. But it's only going to be, a slow process in complete dialogue with people working on the science of brain enhancements. There are different computational theories of consciousness out there too. I didn't get to talk about those, but I mean, there's, for example, the information integration approach, which offers a measure of consciousness. I think there are problems with that approach, though. I'm more sympathetic to Bernie Barr's global workspace approach. I think, it could be possible that something has a global workspace, but because it's made of silicon just isn't the right kind of medium for consciousness. So I think we have to be extremely careful. So what I was doing today was just raising the openness of the question. I think it's important that as transhumanists, we remember that while enhanced intelligence is a wonderful prospect, it has to be something that's compatible with being conscious for us to embark upon the path to radical brain enhancement. And that if machines can't be conscious, even if they're smarter than us, from a legal standpoint, there's a different constellation of issues to consider. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry that I wasn't very good on Second Life. I'm still navigating it. It was really fun, though. I had a good time, and I'm really enjoying hearing the talks. And Lori, thank you for inviting me.
Susan, thank you so much for coming and enduring all the trials and tribulations of a newbie in Second Life. I think you did wonderful, and you certainly put forth a great thought-provoking presentation. And anyone who put a question forth that wasn't answered, I'm putting my email address here because I can forward anything to Susan. Of course, and also we will be, the conference center remains open and is always here for people to come in, and everyone's welcome to stay and have their own discussions, informal interaction after this event. And Susan put forth her email address. So if anyone has any further questions for Susan that weren't addressed, or further discussions they'd like to enter into, there's Susan's email address and her website. So thank you again, Susan. And if you could navigate toward the chairs again, that would be great. And we will.
I'm trying it. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Use the arrows on your keyboard.
Oh, wait, walk, run, fly. Ooh, can I fly? All right,
yes.
Thanks, Thank you.
Thank you again, Susan. Don't forget to turn your speaker off. Okay, now The next and final speaker of the day is an inventor and systems technologist with Person Vitro LLC. Please welcome Leslie Seymour to the podium. Leslie, do you have your speaker engaged? Click the speak button.
Hello, hello.
You're coming through just fine, Leslie.
Hello.
We
Can you hear
you.
me? Okay, thank you. Well, I appreciated the opportunity to contribute to this fantastic event, and thank you for accepting my proposal to convey my message here, and especially to the speakers before me, since what I'm going to do right now, I am going to try to connect the dots between John's speech and Susan's speech, how to get from the current state of the quantified self-based persona models to something like uploading to a digital self 2.0 state. I think what I'm going to talk about is how to get to a self 0.5 state, and that hopefully that will satisfy to some extent what Serene was commenting on, that it's all fine, but how do we get from here where we are to all these fantastic scenarios that we describe here. Now this slide would kind of introduce who I am. I am a computer engineer with approximately half a century of experience going through the pain of all of these skeptical comments while in the middle of developing the bleeding edge of the next big things. And well, David was kind of giving certain similar examples from the nuclear industry and from genetic editing. Now, I got plenty of personal examples from the computer industry and distributed computing and GPS navigation. And well, the funny thing is that you can, as you can see, the bottom part of it, all of these concerns got addressed when products were finally released and rolled out. But some of the concerns were very good because it wasn't easy to manage them. And it sets the stage to all the moral and legal challenges that I listed in the next slide here on the left side. It's a little bit similar to Jones' legal values, a little bit different because this is from the engineering point of view. Privacy and security are the two values that are built in the solution. And the rest of them are kind of derivatives. Privacy and security are the values that can be implemented by in gateways, in the 2030 scenarios that Kurzweil describes as the extension of the brain neocortex in the cloud, there will be a gateway, of course, between the brain and the clouds, either a prosthetics or most recently, Ray is talking about nanobots are mining our mind and connecting it to a cloud. And in the cloud, we are going to have our virtual private cloud, partitioning it, that will not be completely isolated from other people's virtual private cloud. So in that sense, we are going to have a second gateway there. And those gateways will be excellent control points to mitigate the privacy and security concerns. The rest of the content in this slide, on this slide, is kind of typical examples why we should be excited about these opportunities. For example, educational benefits or benefits in free enterprise and better. Yes. Yes, Lori.
Okay, bye.
No, that's someone else has their. I think Susan has her speak button engaged. Susan, please click the speak button.
Okay. So just to grab that, once our mind is extended to the cloud and we want to go to the school, the entire curriculum could be downloaded into our virtual private cloud portion, and whatever we want to learn in 4 or 5 years as lexical knowledge, I mean, can be immediately accessible after a few minutes or a few seconds of download. Sounds a little bit utopistic, but the way it's currently described by the visionaries, it's quite possible. And now, of course, that will raise a lot of ethical and moral and legal issues, of course, especially in employment. Someone works 25 years in the major corporation, makes 3 times as much money as an intern, and then it turns out that the intern can be enhanced with all that knowledge and experience in a few minutes. So how do you reconcile a situation like that in terms of logistics and rules and regulations and the stability of the community? Well, Ray's answer is that the sentient feature, the sentient self will still stay in our brain. So our motivations, our incentives and objectives, and how we relate to other human beings and sentient beings, that will be probably the very last thing to be uploaded digitally somewhere into an infrastructure, if it ever happens. Okay, so talking about sentient AI, well, sentient AI will be interesting because sentient AI will work with a whole different type of data that we worked in the last 50 years. So first we started with digits, and today we are somewhere establishing quantified self, lifelog, live stream type of content as a major challenge of the day and a major value proposition in existing companies. And we just started digitizing the so-called omics structure, which is the 8 genomics, bacteriomics, and I'm not a medical professional to explain those, even if we did have time. But Stanford finished that research about a few years ago by Professor Snyder's department, and now we have startups that are actually collecting all that data, and a few years from now, that data will form 95% of all the data that's stored in digitized form. And so that starts today. And I would have to get back again to Serian's comment that it's all that fast advancement of technology. It's very nice, but if we don't speed up our decision-making process, then there's not much benefit we will have. So exactly speeding up this decision-making process will happen by implementing Kurzweil's visions by 2030 that our brain is connected to the cloud, and the cloud will implement sentient AI real fast. So this is basically the history of getting to sentient AI. Also starts around 1950. Just briefly, this is a very good sign because it means that the risk is not as big as it looks. So we are taking one step at a time. So this is the brick chart. What is the personal data that sentient AI is processing? The top line is the digitized observations of our experiences, basically quantified self-life log. The bottom part is the medical omics. And then in between, there are two layers that are more abstractions about ourselves that we do understand. And sentient AI is exactly the tool that's the most efficient to derive those. So derives objects, concepts, our emotional states, interests from our observation, and similarly many of those things can derive by sentient AI from the omics data. Now, since people was close to my age, they let's see, it doesn't advance too fast here. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction here. Okay. So Zoltan was talking about various ways of survival, extreme longevity. Well, the three major thrusts is the physical immortality, biomedical preservation like cryonics, and the information preservation. So that's what we see in the Rhodes. And the columns are representing basically a platform of technology components that support all of them. So a personal data model support and for information preservation is exactly the uploading. For seamless endless survival, it's kind of a personalized healthcare and advisory, and so on. So brain augmentation in the cloud, it's another platform component that supports all three of these. Community supports the same thing. So the good news is that even if we are not sure which of these three we want to choose as our primary chance for survival, we can choose all three of them, and at the same time we can pursue these component technologies, collecting as much data as possible while staying alive as much as possible, and at the same time augmenting our brain in networks as much as possible. There are those components will support all three. Now the next slide is probably the most complex that I ever will show you, and my apologies for the complexity. All you need to know that there are three colors. The white on the top is what we had started, what we have right now and started developing 15 years ago. That's LifeLook US. The bottom part of it is the blue. That's basically the Kurzweil's vision of neocortex connected to the cloud. And the interesting thing is that this green stuff that's going to connect those two. That's an answer to Serene's. It would take me half an hour to explain it to you, and I'm sure a lot of people are working on it. I published this 3 years ago. Now there are hundreds and thousands of downloads of it. So I feel comfortable that the most important parts of it are happening, and this is what I see as the best assurance that the transition will be safe and there won't be any unexpected explosion. So finally, listing again the moral and legal values on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, what will be the major challenges and opportunities and benefits by 2030. In the middle, we see a few columns that show that these opportunities and challenges are not going to show up from the blue, from the thin air. There we had quite good and nice progress in the last few decades for each and every one of these areas of legal infrastructure support and ethical supports. And so the nightmare scenarios are not as likely as some of the sci-fi products would show it, but it's very good that they are showing, because it raises our awareness, and this mitigation doesn't come for free. So to summarize my message, and I'm just underlying what Zoltan said, we should not develop independent superintelligence. There's no point. Why don't we just augment our intelligence as much as we can, gradually and safe, and use the same interpersonal mechanism that we have between us and the society to keep the checks and balances, and just become more productive with the new sentient AI in the cloud. And again, the two gateways, those gateways worked perfectly for the worldwide, I'm sorry, not perfectly, but they prevented the disaster. Sometimes a little bit expensive, but it works for the World Wide Web. It's going to work also when the World Wide Web in the cloud has humans connected to it. And it worked for GPS navigation, and no major catastrophes or major increase in the accident rate. And last but not least, the engineering processes are very important. We were successful in developing the most complex systems with disruptive technologies, and what comes next with brain extension in the cloud is probably the most complex that we ever wanted to do, and that's why it's very, very important to have a clear and crisp definition. What is the person that needs to survive, who needs to survive? It's a definition phase that's driving the entire development, and it's also the basis of a continuous validation in the process. Well, thank you for bearing with me, and I hope we have a few minutes time for addressing some questions you might have.
Okay, Leslie, if you haven't done so already, please click on the chat button on the lower left, and you can open the chat box and see the questions.
Okay. Now, how do I get rid of the list of participants, because they are taking up all the space in the chat box? Oh, okay, let's open it. Okay, I just increase it. Okay.
You can click and drag it.
Okay, I did it. Thank you. Let's see. Who made the first question? That is saying about pain. I want my primary to copy. Let's see. Who had the first question?
Some of them were comments, so you just may wish to pick a question.
What's the time? The time tag on it? That's 11 o'clock.
That's Pacific time.
It's Pacific, so it's 11:30 then. Okay. 11:15. Let's see. They are abstract. That's the point. Ted Horowitz, Serena. Keith is talking to Susan. Thank you, Susan. Extropia, no Serena, because the copies have unique experiences. That's not to me, I think. What equals that? Pain is not the basis. I don't think it's. Let's see. Let's see. Okay. What are you? Pattern is not an abstract. Kurzweil, Extropia da Silva. Kurzweil talks of functional models running on suitable hardware as conscious minds. So he's not all about abstract programs as consciousness. I don't know, was it addressed to me? Or? No, it's still the discussion. Okay.
There's one at the bottom, Leslie, from Ted Howard NZ. It says, do you see cloud and personal expansion evolving together? Do you see risk in giving control to the cloud?
Yes, I do, and the cloud shouldn't. I don't see the question, but I thank you for voicing it. Yeah, the cloud should not. Again, the cloud shouldn't get control. And I was fortunate enough to witness a few conversations with Kurzweil on it, and he kind of confirmed it. So the cloud will have portions, virtual partitions that are extensions of biological human beings, and our biological brain is going to be in a so-called master mode. So the cloud can give us orders of magnitude higher volume of knowledge and data. But we can picture it as a database, and our biological brain is going to send requests to them and getting response. So there will be a very controlled communication between the cloud partition and our brain, and also a very controlled communication between different partitions of the cloud. So, for example, my extension and Lori's extension. So it's not going to go to a central dispatch system that will control it. That what I'm supposed to tell to Lori. Now, obviously, the details of it, how to implement it, and what are the rules of this communication limitations are. That's where the devil is and the value is. But the good news is the sentient AI could give a very good support to set up these rule set, these policies, what can go through those gateways. So there will be no centralized cloud that has any kind of control, and even our private cloud portions don't have any control over us.
Leslie, Oz Harker asks, why would we feel safer allowing external access to our brains? We all know how safe we make all of our firewalls.
Well, it's a good question, and that sounds like the same question that was asked back at the end of the 1980s, that how this completely distributed processing would be safe. Well, again, the firewalls are not 100% safe. They can be hacked, and I'm sure the gateways between the extensions will be a challenge to build, and again it's like when the border control is enforcing some strict rule book who should come into this country and who not. But in addition to that, the border control personnel is also using their personal sentient natural intelligence to make some decisions, and the gateways in the cloud will be beefed up with sentient AI intelligence. So if it senses some sort of fishy business there, it will signal it, and eventually there will be a human decision there. Just like a credit card uses is flagging. I'm sure that sooner or later we already have some sort of sentient AI, some initial steps in banking and credit card use, and I see that as more and more personal data will be available for this kind of gateways, those sentient AI type of flagging of dangers will be more and more proficient. But it's I agree that the security control in the computer industries is mushrooming, so all the VCs are putting their money into it, and it's I think it's going to continue, and it might be a bottleneck. I agree, and it might slow down. And exactly the legal and the ethical limitations and regulations might notice the problems and slow down the development until this security control technology can catch up, in case it lags behind.
Okay, lastly, Dust Walker asks, why go with nanobots or brain dust when things like bandwidth and heat dissipation might fry the brain? Also, how would you keep back doors in places like the NSA and CIA out of your brain or upload to machine from being altered by them or groups like them? Optogenetics to fibers seem to be one of the few better options for bridging to computer systems.
Well, thank you for the comment. I am following neuroscience, and I was kind of referring to it where I understood. So in terms of heat dissipation and prosthetics versus optogenetics, I think it's a good comment, because I as a layman, I think I heard about optogenetics, and I can see that it's less heat dissipation, and it could be the reason that Ray Kurzweil stopped talking about prosthetics. I think 3 years ago I heard him the first time. I think that's what I was hearing, but most recently, the last few months, he was talking about nanobots. So I appreciate the comment, and I don't have the expertise to give more details about it. Now about the CIA and Homeland Security and stuff, that's another bottleneck that might slow down the whole thing again, of course. And we had the same issues with the conventional communications technologies when they were new, right? With the phone system, cell phones were especially vulnerable to interception. There was a lawful interception built in the wireless infrastructure feature that only court orders could authorize the authorities to turn it on. And again, these gateways will be regulated similarly. And there could be some initial pain, of course, because if it gets rolled out too fast, the competence in overseeing these and understanding the internal details will be very much limited. So I think the society will exercise the same control, same type of control that was exercised before. So in a democratic society, so to keep security and the development of the technology and the framework of the Constitution. And it's again, I think sentient AI could be helpful here, but I'm not that much of a futurist that I could see in the crystal ball how exactly it's going to roll out.
Okay, Leslie, possibly one or two more questions. Ted Howard NZ asks, when cloud inputs can overwhelm sensory inputs, how is that not control?
Cloud inputs overwhelm sensory inputs. You mean sensory inputs of the human body? I understand. Well, it could, but that's why if the gateway policies, if the gateway filtering policies and communication limitation policies are not crafted carefully. So we had similar issues with the early distributed computing when there was a data flow model type of communication between two processors or two computers, and if the slave computer started pushing too much stuff on the master computer and initiated the whole thing, then it could close down the master computer. That's the so-called denial of service attack. So the same thing can happen in a human body too, if the throttling of the communication going back and forth is not designed carefully enough. It's actually not configured carefully enough. So it basically says that I'm requesting. So stuff is not going to be pushed from the cloud to my brain unless I set up some periodical requests, just like we have it in real-time computing for the last 35 years. And whenever it's a clock-driven notification coming to my brain or event-driven, the volume of it will be and the volume and the extent of it and the impact of it will be limited in the gateway. And there could be a gateway in the brain itself, and there could be also a gateway just at the edges of the cloud infrastructure. So it's a valid concern, and it should be engineered in that no one could abuse it. Of course, there will be, just like today, there are all sorts of fights between hackers and security experts, how to keep the firewall safe. And now when you got law enforcement agencies coming in, of course, it makes it more complex, and lay people like myself, and perhaps most of you, probably doesn't see all the internal rules and regulations, how it's governed. But I don't see why it should be more dangerous than or more unstable than the previous similar problems were, especially since if now our physical brain, our biological brain can be subjected to attack, so it makes it less likely that we are going to notice it too late. So it could be actually a good news. If I wake up in the middle of the night that I got some strange signals in my head, I will try to do something about it. Well, if someone is hacking my firewall and I'm too busy to log in for a month, it could be too late. The damage is done.
Okay, Leslie, there's a comment here, and there might possibly be a question within this comment from Serendipity Sarath. we are porous mentally now, very prone to mimetic infections and runaway emotions. I don't see how having a direct connection to the internet greatly changes that for good or ill.
Well, talking about emotions, how emotions will be impacted by having an extension in the cloud, it's a good question, and again, I can just refer to Kurzweil, who I'm sure was thinking more about it than I did and had more resources to think about it and more brilliance to think about it. And when the questions were asked, what are the things that we delegate to the cloud and what are the things that we keep it in our brain, usually the answer was that all the sentient variables that we have in our brain, those are the last one that would migrate to the brain, to the cloud, and there are several layers of those too. So our personality traits and emotional states and objectives and motivations are driving the questions, the requests that we send out to the cloud. And when the answer gets back, we are using the same emotions to interpret them. Now, again, it's I do think that the question is good because one person can drive another nuts deliberately by knowing the weaknesses of his or her target and just keep pressing the other person without noticing it by the other person until it reaches a point when there is a problem, a psychological problem or something. So this is a very sophisticated way of attacking one entity by another entity, and the target here is a live brain. And again, the solution and the defense is the same thing that I was trying to address for the previous questions. It's like a Trojan horse today, right? So it's easy to download a new app and some virus in it, and it might be dormant there for a year and collect all sorts of data and sending it out, and then a year later, suddenly you notice that your identity is stolen and your money is missing from your bank account. So I think it's not different from it, the mechanism of it.
Okay, Leslie, I think one more question or clarification. I see there's a discussion between two of the attendees, Serene and Mr. Fast Future, in regards to what it is that you're talking more about one thing than the other. So on the tail end here, Serene says that you are talking more about augmenting the mind than uploading. Is that correct?
Exactly. So before uploading, I think the first step should be augmenting the mind, and and they're looking at the timeline of the forecast. It's kind of realistic because A is talking about 2030 for this augmenting the mind and uploading the mind. I just a week ago I saw a new company, Humai, Humai, somewhere in Los Angeles. They are promising subscribers to upload their mind within 30 years. So yeah, but it's a good first step because it at least establishes a communication transport between the brain and the cloud, and that's absolutely needed to implement any kind of uploading. And right, whatever, I mean, functionally and complexity wise, it's the first performance and productivity enhancements will be limited to just certain sections of the neocortex. If, in my view, if we want to upload the entire self, the entire brick chart that I showed you, from starting from experiences all the way to the 7 or 8 onyx, you would need extremely high bandwidth communication. You would have to sleep, I don't know, perhaps days to push all that data up to an external storage, and there would be I don't know, we got a trillion cells in our body. Either all of that stuff would have to go up, even if you don't consider quantum consciousness. So it's way it's way out in the future, even after we have the brain augmentation. And if you want to address the issue, is it really me? I think this augmentation would be just the tip of the iceberg of myself. It would definitely need my body and then the rest of my nervous system to talk about that it's my consciousness.
Okay, Leslie, that was a marvelous presentation. You ended today's colloquium, I think, on a most inspirational note, giving us a lot to consider now and moving forward. So with that, that concludes our colloquium today. Terasem thanks all of today's speakers for presenting during its 10th annual colloquium on the Law of Futuristic Persons. And to all who attended and participated in the event, thank you very, very much. I will remain in the conference center until all attendees are gone, and the center is here for however long for the informal interaction following this event. So please feel free to move about, speak with each other. If anyone has anything that they would like to send to today's speakers, I'm going to put my email address in the chat box. Please feel free to forward any further questions or say request to be able to communicate with one of the speakers. I will forward it on, and then the speaker may opt to contact you directly after that. So again, thank you on behalf of Terasem Movement for speaking or participating in this event. I think this was one of our best events yet, if not the best event yet. So again, thank you all for attending.
Thank you for everyone for the excellent question and attendance. And unfortunately, I cannot leave, so Lori should feel free to give out my email address or forward the questions anytime. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.